It was a lazy Wednesday afternoon at the dealership. A guy came in, maybe spent 2 hours looking at a truck, test drove it twice. I watched him from my office and I said, he sold it. You could see it in the way that he sat in the driver's seat for the second time, hands on the wheel, just quiet. He just needed a reason to come back.
And what happened?
My sales manager said, I'll follow up, boss. And he meant to. He absolutely meant to. But Thursday morning, there was a floor full of inventory, a financing issue on another deal, and someone called in sick.
So let me guess, the follow-up didn't happen.
No.
And the guy?
Bought the same truck, same color, at the competitor 28 miles away.
Ooh,
I found out 3 weeks later when someone on my team saw him drive by.
oh, and the follow-up that didn't happen? How long would that have taken?
4 minutes, maybe 5. A simple phone call saying, hey, just checking in. Any questions? That's all that is needed. 4 minutes.
So a $52,000 sale walked out of your dealership because a 4-minute task got buried under everything else happening that day?
I was angry for weeks at my sales manager, at the process, at myself, honestly. And eventually I realized it wasn't a people problem. It was a systems problem. The follow-up needed to happen automatically, not when someone remembered, every time, without exception.
Right now, that same situation is playing out in thousands of small businesses every single day. Not with truck sales, with leads of every kind, contact form submissions, referral inquiries, someone who found you on Facebook Marketplace or a local group and messaged you at 9 on a Tuesday night, and somewhere between that message and Wednesday morning, they moved on to someone who responded first.
Not because your service isn't better, not because your reputation isn't real, but because the system that should have responded wasn't built yet.
And today, we build it. I'm Kim,
I'm Hal.
and this is Small Business Big AI, the podcast for operators who are building systems, not just using tools.
This is week 3 of the Impact series. So far, we've built the thinking architecture: identify, mode, parameters. Today is where that architecture starts earning its keep.
And that's activate, where AI stops thinking and starts doing, where the system runs while you're in a meeting with a client, at dinner with your family, or let's be honest, while you're sleeping.
This is the one everybody's been waiting for.
That's right. This is the one. But before we get into the how, there's a version of AI workflow that lives in a lot of operators' imaginations. And it's wrong.
Which version?
It's the version that requires a developer, Hal. APIs, integrations, 6 weeks of configuration, and a consultant on retainer. And that image stops a lot of operators before they even start.
In the reality,
Well, the reality is James.
Kim, before we get to James, let's make sure everyone understands the distinction we're drawing here. Because I think a lot of operators feel like they're already doing something with AI. And they are.
Well, yeah, they are, Hal, and I want to honor that. What most businesses are doing right now is what I call conversation mode. You open AI, you give it a task, you get an output, you use it, and you close the window. And that's real value. I mean, first drafts in minutes, research in an afternoon that used to take a day, communications that used to eat 45 minutes of your morning done in like 12.
Legitimate gains.
Yeah, legitimate. But conversation mode has a ceiling because every output still requires you, your presence, your prompt. The moment you close the window, everything stops. Nothing moves without you in the room.
So it's fast assistance, but you're still the engine.
You're still the engine. And a workflow changes that equation entirely. A workflow has a trigger, something that starts it. It has a sequence, steps it moves through in order, and it has an outcome, something produced or delivered at the end. And you don't have to be present for any of it.
That's the jump from you showing up for the work to the system showing up instead.
And it's a jump that most businesses never make, not because they can't, because they've never mapped out what their repeatable processes actually look like as a sequence. They are so close to the work that they've stopped seeing the pattern.
James was the same way until he wasn't.
That's right. So James runs a premium residential cleaning company in Atlanta. 12 employees, about 200 active clients. 8 years of building a business on exactly two things: the quality of the service and the reliability of the communication.
A reputation business.
Completely. The kind of business where clients stay for years because they trust James. And part of that trust comes from something that James does that most operators stopped doing a long time ago. He carries a notebook.
A notebook?
Yep, a small black that fits in his back pocket. And in that notebook, 8 years of the details that matter. Mrs. Patterson in Buckhead doesn't want anyone touching the photo frames on the mantel. The Henderson family has a golden retriever named Biscuit who needs to be in the laundry room before the team arrives. The Woodburns leave a key under the third step on the left, and they like the throw pillows arranged a specific way.
He's been carrying all that?
Right, in a notebook for 8 years, because that's the business that he built, the business that remembers what other people forget. His clients know it, they feel it, they refer him because of it. That notebook, those details, that's his reputation in 200 pages.
And the notebook can't keep up with the growth he wants.
It cannot keep up, Hal, because for every page of details James adds, there's a lead sitting in his inbox that he hasn't responded to yet. A new inquiry that arrived while he was on a job site managing a scheduling issue or carefully writing down that Mrs. Calloway's kitchen counters needed extra attention. And every morning, the first 90 minutes of his day vanish into the same sequence.
Describe this sequence.
Well, he clocked it, read the inquiry, figure out what they need, send a qualifying question like size of the home, frequency, any special requirements, pets, and then wait for the response. Draft a proposal based on their answers, send it, set a reminder to follow up in 2 days if they don't respond. If they book, update the CRM. If they go quiet, add them to the nurture list.
And how long does that take per inquiry?
Well, 23 minutes, start to finish, every time.
On a busy week, 8, 10 new inquiries?
Well, yeah, that's nearly 4 hours every week before he's even done a single thing that requires the 8 years of his experience that he built in his business, before he's managed even a single team member, before he's handled a client issue before he's even added a single new name to that notebook.
He's spending 4 hours a week being his own administrative coordinator for a process that runs exactly the same way every single time?
Yes, and he told me, I know exactly what I'm going to do before I start. I just have to be there to do it.
That's the definition of a workflow waiting to be built.
Exactly. And once he saw it that way, once he stopped thinking about individual tasks and started thinking about the sequence, everything changed.
Walk me through that workflow, what it actually looks like, because I think this is the moment where people either see it clearly or they don't.
All right. And I want to be concrete because the architecture is simpler than really most operators expect. So every workflow has three components: a trigger, a sequence, and an outcome.
Start with the trigger.
Well, for James, the trigger is a new inquiry landing in his inbox, and that's it. Someone fills out his contact form. An email arrives from a referral. A message comes in from Facebook Marketplace or some local group. And the moment that happens, the workflow starts.
In the sequence,
So the sequence has five parts, five steps. And this is the workflow that James actually built, not theoretical, nothing borrowed from a template. So we look at it. Step one, that's intake and read. AI reads the inquiry. It pulls out the key details, name, what they're looking for, how they found the business, anything specific that they mention, and it organizes it into a clean intake note.
so instead of James reading and mentally sorting through it,
It's actually already sorted, clean, waiting for him. 30 seconds of his time instead of 5 minutes. Step two, qualification. Based on that intake note, AI drafts a qualifying response, warm, specific to what the inquiry mentioned. It asks the two or three questions that James always needs answered before he can quote, like the frequency of service, square footage, pets, anything special.
does that go out automatically?
Yeah, for standard inquiries, the ones that look like his typical client profile, yes, automatically. For anything unusual or high value, it routes to his review queue first. Now, that's a parameter that he defined. His judgment stays in the loop exactly where it matters most,
So he's not reviewing every single one.
just the edge cases. And he defined what an edge case looks like: large estate, commercial property, referral from a specific high value client. Anything in those categories pauses for James. Everything else moves. Now, step three, proposal draft. When the prospect responds with their details, AI generates a proposal, uses James's pricing structure, his service descriptions, his brand voice, the mode and parameters he built in the thinking system. The proposal sounds like James wrote it at his best, not his most rushed.
Because the thinking layer existed before the workflow did.
Exactly that. This is where last week pays off directly. The mode James defined, the trusted neighborhood professional who notices what others miss, that's running inside every proposal that this workflow generates. And the parameters, conversational, never clinical, always specific to what the client mentioned. Those are in every draft. So the workflow isn't generating generic proposals, it's generating James.
How about step 4?
both follow-up sequence. If the proposal doesn't respond within 48 hours, a follow-up goes out. Warm, specific, not pushy. Acknowledges that they're probably busy, offers a clear next step. Now, if they still don't respond after another week, then there's one final touch. Then they move to a long-term nurture list.
All this is happening without James thinking about it.
Exactly, without James thinking about it, because he thought about it once when he built the workflow, and now it runs. So step 5, the final step, that's the CRM update. Whatever happens, they book, they decline, or they go quiet, the record updates automatically. No manual entry, no forgotten follow-ups. The history is accurate because the workflow is maintaining it.
Trigger, intake, qualifications, proposal, follow-up, CRM, the whole sequence.
Right, the whole sequence running without him while he runs a job site, while he manages his team, while he adds new names to that notebook. The details that make his business what it is.
Let's do the math because I want our listeners to actually feel this number, not just hear it.
Okay, well, let's do it.
Before the workflow, 23 minutes per inquiry, 10 inquiries a week. That's 230 minutes, nearly 4 hours every week without fail.
Right, every week.
After the workflow, 3, maybe 4 minutes per inquiry, just the edges that needed his eyes. 40 minutes total at most.
At most.
So he gets back 3.5 hours a week. Over a year, that's more than 180 hours.
That's more than 4 full work weeks returned.
To use however he wants.
Right. More clients, more time with his team, more entries in the notebook, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting, to pursue growth that he'd been actively avoiding, Hal.
Because the overhead that used to make growth feel dangerous,
It is no longer there.
At the dealership, growth always had a cost. Always. More leads meant more people. More people meant more management. More management meant more of my time.
But a workflow, Hal, doesn't work that way. So 10 more leads a week costs James almost nothing additional. 20 more, 50 more. The sequence runs regardless of volume. The only thing that changes on the other end is the output.
So growth doesn't add administrative burden, it adds revenue.
Yes, that all-important revenue. So for the first time in 8 years, and James tested this, he ran a local ad, something that he'd really avoided for years because he didn't have the bandwidth to handle what came back. But he'd watched competitors run ads and he thought, okay, not yet. Not until I can manage what that brings.
What happened when he ran it?
Well, 42 new inquiries in 1 week.
42 pre-workflow? What does that look like?
Well, pre-workflow, that's 16 hours of administrative work in a single week on top of everything else that he's already managing.
That's not growth. That's a crisis.
It would have been, but instead, his workflow handled 40 of the 42. He only reviewed 2, both large estate properties that hit his edge case parameters, and then maybe spent 40 minutes total.
And
Booked 11 new recurring clients from that single campaign.
11 new recurring clients.
From one campaign in 1 week, 40 minutes of James's time.
I want to sit with that for a second because I've run campaigns. I know what it's like to generate 42 qualified leads. I know what it costs to convert 11 of them to recurring clients. I know what recurring means for a service business where clients stay for years.
Right. That's not a productivity upgrade, Hal.
That's a different business.
That's the business the workflow made possible. Not because James got smarter, not because the market changed, because the system could now absorb what the market was offering without costing him the thing he'd spent 8 years protecting.
I want to ask about the failure mode because I don't want anyone walking away from this episode thinking they should go build a workflow for everything immediately. What actually breaks when people activate before the foundation is there?
Well, everything, but specifically three things, Hal. And I want to be honest about this because the operators who are frustrated with AI automations right now, who say, I've tried and found it inconsistent or inaccurate or maybe even just slightly off, almost always skip one of these.
First one,
Intent unclear. If you haven't done identify, if you haven't defined what the workflow is actually trying to accomplish, the automation optimizes for the wrong thing. So James's workflow isn't just trying to respond quickly, it's trying to convert a lead into a long-term recurring client who ends up in the notebook. Now, those are completely different goals. A workflow built only for speed might close the loop fast without building any relationship. So, intent shapes every decision the sequence makes.
speed is a means, not the destination.
Right. Speed is a means, not the destination. Now, the second failure is boundaries undefined. So, this is where parameters become critical inside a workflow. So, without clear boundaries, the system doesn't know when to stop, when to pause, when to route to a human. So, James's workflow doesn't handle estate properties automatically because he told it not to before the workflow ran a single time. Operators who skip parameters end up with systems that keep moving through situations that they were never designed for.
And that can get expensive or embarrassing, sometimes both at once.
That's right. So then, third, thinking inconsistent. So, mode at scale. If you activate a workflow without a defined mode, the intelligence inside has no consistent posture. It might write one proposal that sounds warm and relationship focused, and then the next one that reads like a form letter. Not because anything broke technically, but because nobody told it how to think.
Now you got James's notebook level care on Monday, at generic template on Wednesday. And the client on Wednesday doesn't know what Monday looked like. She just knows that this doesn't feel like what her neighbor described.
Exactly how, and that inconsistency shows up in the relationship before it shows up in the numbers. And that is why the impact loop is a loop. Identify, mode, parameters. Those aren't setup tasks that you complete once and forget. They're the architecture. The workflow runs inside. And when that architecture is solid, activate is where all of it pays off. Now, when it isn't,
You've automated confusion.
at scale, and the fix isn't a better workflow, it's going back to the foundation, which is why we spent 3 weeks building it before we got here today. So here's what I want you to do this week. And notice, I'm not asking you to build a workflow yet.
Just map one.
Right, map one. Pick one process in your business that you repeat. the same sequence, the same steps every single time it happens. It could be how you handle a new client inquiry or how you onboard a new customer, how you respond to a specific type of request, maybe even how you produce a weekly report. Any repeatable process.
Write it down.
Write the trigger, what starts it. Write the steps, what happens in order. Write the outcome, what gets produced at the end. And then ask yourself one question. Which of these steps require my specific judgment and which ones just require intelligence?
Because the ones that require intelligence, not necessarily yours.
Those are where the workflow lives, not replacing your judgment, but protecting it, giving it the space it deserves.
One workflow map, that's the homework.
One map. And if you're not sure where to start, think about the first 90 minutes of your day. Because James's 4 hours were right there every morning, hiding in a sequence he'd repeated so many times he'd stopped seeing it as a choice.
Let's bring it home. Conversations are valuable, but they have a ceiling. You have to be there. You have to prompt. The moment you close the window, the workforce stops.
And workflows remove that ceiling. AI operates inside the sequence, handles the execution, moves things forward while you're doing something else entirely. And unlike a human handling the same process, the workflow scales without adding to your overhead.
42 inquiries, 40 minutes, 11 new recurring clients.
Because the thinking system existed first. The intent was identified. The mode was defined. The parameters were set. And the workflow ran inside that architecture, the one we built in episodes 84 and 85. This is where those investments pay off here today. Because tools respond.
Systems run.
And James, he added 3 new entries to the notebook this week. Mrs. Calloway in Decatur, who has a thing about the kitchen counters, the Nugents, who want the team in and out before noon, and a new family in Sandy Springs, whose 4-year-old left them a drawing on the front door the day the team first arrived.
He kept the drawing?
Right, framed it, put it in the office.
That's the business he built.
That's the business the workflow is protecting, not replacing, protecting, giving him the capacity to keep being the person who notices, who carries the notebook without being buried by everything else that needed to happen before the notebook could even come out.
Now, here's the thing about giving AI more autonomy, more execution, more permission to operate while you're not watching.
It comes with a responsibility that most businesses haven't thought about yet.
Oversight.
Right. Oversight, governance. Because here's the question that's been sitting underneath this entire conversation. When James's workflow is running 40 leads a week while he's on a job site, while he's adding to the notebook, while he's asleep, and something goes sideways, well, who's responsible?
That's not a technology question.
Right, that's a leadership question. And it's the one that most operators don't think about until they have to. So next week, episode 87, we talk about the step of the impact loop that nobody really gets excited about. The one that feels like overhead. The one that often gets skipped.
Until it doesn't.
Until it doesn't. Until then, map the workflow. Find the sequence that's been hiding in your mornings and notice how how much of what keeps you reactive was waiting all along to be designed out of your day.
And keep building your technology-enabled superpower. And this has been Small Business
Big AI. So we'll catch you in the next episode.